Hello, my name is Dr. Jackie Hinckley, and I'm Executive Director of Voices of Hope for Aphasia. We are very proud to be collaborating with the University of South Florida at St. Petersburg on a project called Project Bridge, Building Research Initiatives by Developing Group Effort. This project is funded through a Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute Engagement Award, and the project is designed to provide webinar-based training for researchers, but also for people with aphasia and their families, leading to the creation of research teams that will include researchers, clinicians, people with aphasia, and their families. The research teams will be created at a conference coming up in October of 2018, and we'll give you the details about that at the end of this webinar. This is the first in a series of 3 webinars designed for researchers and clinicians, and the title of this one is How Involving Patient Partners Benefits Research. At the end of this webinar, you will be able to define collaborative research, list levels of consumer participation in research, and discuss the potential benefits and also barriers of collaborating with consumers in research. Involving patient partners in the design, conduct, and dissemination of research has been described as research being carried out with or by members of the public rather than to, about, or for them. And this definition is really at the heart of this entire project. We are focusing on how we can conduct research with people with aphasia and their families. In order to conduct collaborative research with people with aphasia and their families, those individuals need to receive background information and training on how to communicate with researchers, the basics of what is research, and similar topics. They need to have a basis on which they feel confident that they could have a conversation with researchers. On the other hand, researchers and clinicians need to consider the special ways and adaptations that people with aphasia and their families can become collaborators, and think about those in specific detail. And that's the point of this series of 3 webinars for researchers. There are plenty of motivations for involving patient partners into the research process. The underlying foundation for including people in research is the disability rights movement with its motto, "Nothing about us without us." The idea here is that people living with the condition are the best ones to inform us about perhaps what the priorities are for certain kinds of research, or to help us understand better ways to include them or to address their particular concerns. When we involve the viewpoint of patient partners or consumers, it is likely and tends to improve the relevance of the research. It is likely to address the concerns of the actual people living with that particular health condition. And it may even improve the quality of research. There may arise different ways of looking at a problem or a question or different ways of addressing it that perhaps researchers on their own might not actually consider. Here are some of the general ways that consumers or patient partners have been involved in research. For example, patient partners can help identify research priorities or help to set research agendas. They can be experts in the development of patient information or consent procedures and provide an expert view on whether those information forms or procedures are appropriate for people with their health condition. Patient partners can help to actually design interventions and placebos. They can provide input into how feasible a particular intervention trial might be for the person who's actually undergoing the intervention. Patient partners and consumers have been involved in identifying what the outcome measurements should be. Now, of course, outcome measurements are very often driven by scientific principles or needs and the research methods. But the patient partner viewpoint can help us reconsider the relevance of the outcomes that are being used in any particular research project. Finally, they might offer new questions or raise new issues that would help us reconsider not just how the data are being collected, but perhaps also how we're analyzing those data. And finally, consumers might have particular and innovative views on how the data and the research results can be used to inform policy or clinical practice. And all of these general ways have been accomplished by patient partners in various other health conditions, but not yet in aphasia in the United States. And that's what drives this project. We want to create an environment and an atmosphere in which researchers and people with aphasia and their families can productively work together on research. Well, there are different ways of thinking about collaborative research, but here's one model that seems very useful. In this model, patient partners or consumers have several possible roles in research and at different levels of research. So we're going to talk about these different levels with some examples. Well, the very first level is one we're very familiar with, and that's simply when the consumer serves as a research participant in a study. And in this example, the study has been designed probably completely by the researchers. In the next level, though, patient partners or consumers function as advisory board members. And some of the kinds of activities that might entail include reviewing a recruitment poster, perhaps reviewing instructions for a protocol, or helping to advise on a leaflet about the results that's easy for consumers to understand. These are all sample activities that consumers or patients might complete as an advisory board member to a research project. Now, when it comes to people with aphasia, Sims wrote, "Our concerns that stroke patients may not be able to participate as co-researchers may have been misguided. And so we do have a few examples of people with stroke and aphasia who have been able to participate at different levels of research. The next level of participation is to be perhaps not just an advisory board, but an occasional reviewer and consultant, and to do that from time to time, or perhaps to serve as an advisor on an ongoing basis at regular meetings or at regular points or functions in the research project. The highest level of participation is when a patient partner or a consumer contributes so much to the project that they function as co-researchers along with the researchers. And we're going to look at a couple of different examples of this in the aphasia literature. So here's the first example. In this example, the researchers and a person with aphasia wanted to address the question of returning to work with aphasia and consider the facilitators and barriers for getting back to work. What happened in this particular case is that the researchers wrote and described the story of one particular individual named GD from a clinical point of view. But GD, the person with aphasia, talked about and contributed his viewpoint of what helped him get back to work and what was difficult. The researchers helped to write that up. Ultimately, the researchers and GD worked together to produce a manuscript which was published in the journal Aphasiology. And in this case, GD is listed as one of the authors because he made a substantial enough contribution to certainly be a co-author or co-researcher. Here's a second example of involving people with aphasia at the highest level, level 5. In this example, the researcher and a person with aphasia got together for regular meetings and do a semi-structured interview. After each meeting, the researcher writes up notes and also writes about her own reactions to what was discussed and what the conversation was like. The process of writing and rewriting this is actually a little bit more detailed, but generally speaking, this process is called narrative ethnography. Then the researcher brings what she wrote to the person with aphasia. They read it together. They talk about everything that the researcher wrote. In this case, they agreed that it was a story that the person with aphasia wanted to publish, and the person with aphasia wanted her name to be used in the story. She actually chose not to be listed as an author, so in this case, even though the person with aphasia made a substantial contribution to the project and to the manuscript, she is not listed as a co-author based on personal preference. But this is certainly an example of a high level of collaboration on a project. The third example has to do with researchers approaching an aphasia group with a proposal to talk about research. And in this case, the researchers really they were hoping to get some research priority information from this particular aphasia group. The aphasia group agreed to participate, but only if the researchers would provide information about what aphasia research was out there already, because what was remarkable is that the aphasia group said, we don't know anything about the research that's out there. We have no way of finding information about aphasia research or current aphasia research. Even if it can be located on the internet through any reliable websites, it's not offered in a way that is easy to understand. So that was the next thing that the researchers did. After that, the aphasia group met on their own and came up with their own questions that they thought were important to them and would be great to have some research about. The researchers then got together with the aphasia group and categorized these research questions. In the end, there were 22 research questions that the aphasia group came up with, and they were able to talk about what research areas were most important to them. There are many other examples of how we might involve consumers in research. Those were 3 examples of involving people with aphasia and their families at the highest level. When we do involve consumers in research, there are a number of benefits. So it has been observed in other health areas where they have more of a history of involving patient partners in the research process, that when that happens, there's enhanced quality and relevance of the research. Also, bringing in a different viewpoint tends to balance potential biases when research is solely initiated by the investigators. Research questions are shaped quite differently when consumers or patient partners are involved, and that extends to research priorities. We've already mentioned that outcome measure selection is often affected by conversations and participation with consumers. Another great benefit of including consumers is that there's likely to be increased recruitment and retention of research participants when the participants know that there's a panel of people like them who are serving in some way as part of the research study, whether it be an advisory panel or some other role. Now, researchers who have been involved in collaborating with consumers make up a very nice study of 30 interviews with 35 health researchers that was done in the United Kingdom. And here are some of the things that researchers say about their experiences. Many of them felt that working with patient partners or consumers actually helped them to generate new research ideas. Certainly, research participants got better information that was clearer to them and easier to understand. The interventions were actually designed better when patient partners or consumers were involved. The research became easier and more acceptable for the participants as a result of collaborating with consumers. The data collection and outcomes were more patient-centered. The data analysis was enriched. There were some new or different or novel ideas about how to disseminate the results. And many researchers felt that involving consumers helped to avoid wasteful or pointless research that was not obviously going to be relevant to changing the condition of people living with a particular health situation. Now, that's quite a lovely list of benefits. And we encourage you to actually go to the healthtalk.org website yourself and read and listen to some of the clips of these interviews, which show both the benefits and the challenges of involving consumers and into research process. What are you thinking so far? Do you think that patients and consumers should be involved in any of these levels of research? Well, there definitely are potential barriers, and this is just one example that comes from the same study, which is available to you to review on the healthtalk.org website. So in this example, a health researcher said, so it's like really difficult because these people, referring to consumers, are quite capable people, but they've not had the training. They've not worked as a researcher. You know, everyone knows that to be a researcher, you've got to cut your teeth. You've got to do at least 3 degrees. You've got to do an undergraduate, master's, and PhD. You've got to, you cut your teeth in your first research assistantship where you're closely monitored and evaluated. And then at the opposite end of the spectrum, they just want to bring in these people, in other words, consumers, who've got nothing to do with anything, and let them loose on our study. Ill patients at the bedside. It's really difficult for me, so I've got to kind of be really careful how I manage it. So I think this quote probably, very honestly expresses some of the concerns that researchers might have about including consumers in the research planning or implementation process. Consumers, for everything that they do bring with a different perspective, cannot address all aspects of conducting the research. The researchers, too, bring their own expertise and their own knowledge, and just equally to the consumer. So it really is a collaboration where people have very different experiences that they're bringing to it, and those experiences can contribute to certain parts of the process, perhaps not all. So we have to weigh this. Now, there are recommendations or considerations for how to manage some of these potential barriers or tensions when working with patients who've had stroke and aphasia. One thing is that there has to be adequate time. Time becomes an issue because reviewing instructions or consent procedures, this is going to take additional time if you're going to call a meeting of patient partners or consumers and ask them to go through a review process. We're doing that actually as a part of this project. We do have a project advisory team, and members of the team, as well as others that we reach out to, review all of the information that's part of this project. And it's going to take time. Now, in order to make that time as efficient as possible, the recommendations are that there needs to be plenty of preparation in advance of inviting the people with aphasia in. Aphasia-friendly materials and other communication supports have to really be thought out well and be available from the beginning in order to make it as successful as possible. If you can support the people with aphasia from the very beginning of their experience and collaboration with you, you'll probably in the end almost save a little time, or certainly it'll definitely be more efficient. And it has been observed a great deal of forward planning was needed. So some things like there may be some parts of a research project that some researchers maybe have done many times before on their own, so they're just going along with that. And the first time that they want to get a group of patient partners as advisors to provide advice to that is really going to take some planning and preparation and plenty of time. And then the last one is actually one of the trickier ones. Being open to opposing views from the consumer group was not always easy. So one thing that is critical in this collaborative process is being able to create an open and trusting atmosphere and thinking in advance how to handle potential conflicts of ideas or of opinions about the research project. And there are recommendations in the literature and from various people's experience on some of the best ways to do that, and that's actually a lot of the topic of the next webinar, webinar number 2, is how to address those concerns. So that will be in the next webinar. So what we have seen so far is that when researchers engage with people with aphasia and their families and more active roles in research, the people who have done that tend to report that they find the benefits outweigh the challenges. That's not to say there aren't challenges, because there certainly are. Best way to probably deal with that is to plan for them in advance. And this advanced planning and providing aphasia-friendly materials and support is really critical to the success of the collaboration. So when we started this webinar, we said that at the end you'd be able to define collaborative research, list the levels of consumer participation in research, and we saw 5 different levels, from research participant all the way up to co-researcher, and discuss potential benefits and barriers of collaborating with consumers in research. We saw several benefits, but certainly there were also barriers concerning time and different viewpoints and how to handle conflict. We invite you to please continue watching the next 2 webinars, for a total of 3 in this series, that brings forward the concepts and ideas and information that we need to be thinking about and think in advance about in order to successfully collaborate with people with aphasia and their families. Once you've completed this webinar, we ask you to please complete the webinar evaluation form. One of the items on that form will ask you to provide your contact information if you choose. It's completely optional. But if you do so, you become eligible for one of our travel stipends to attend our October conference, in which we will bring researchers, clinicians, and people with aphasia and their families together to create research teams. If you are interested in having access to people with aphasia and their families who they also have gone through the webinar series and they're attending a conference because they want to be collaborators in research, this is your great opportunity to come and create your research team at this conference. The conference is going to provide a lot of roll up your sleeves, work together, roundtable time during those actual 2 days, and you'll be leaving with a plan with your research team on what it is that you're going to accomplish. If you are particularly interested in PCORI and the kind of patient-centered outcomes research that is supported by the Institute, you might be interested in becoming a PCORI ambassador, and we want to point out this program to you, and you can get more information on the PCORI website. We thank you very much for your attention and your participation, and we hope to see you in the October conference or another time very soon. Thank you.